Hey, I moved recently. I've been studying the art of video games for like 3 years, and I'm still doing it now, and just in a different place from before. I don't have a green screen anymore, sorry about that. Throughout this whole educational endeavor, I've naturally wondered about the topic of games as art, and art as games, and art in games, and artists making games a lot. How my own weird, messy opinions apply to my work and what does and doesn't match up with my peers or even the overall standards of the industry. With every generation of video games, AAA developers tend to aim for as much realism as possible in their biggest releases. As the progression of graphics is gradually slowed, and the improvements we see become more to do with technical details rather than visual capabilities, I've started to wonder how audiences view realism in games to begin with. Games from 20 years ago look ancient now, but only when compared side by side with newer ones. The mindset that older graphics are worse than newer ones prevails, and many folks tend to ignore the artistic direction behind an old game and how, if it accounts for its technical limitations. This is usually purely to do with visuals, but you hear people say stuff like, "I was taken out of the game," because of small details like object physics and polygon count. It puts pressure on developers to hyper-focus on minute graphical details that only matter now because the latest hardware allows for it. If there's even a single noticeable flaw, it's no longer realistic and the designers have somehow failed. Obviously, it's silly to expect perfect detail from any video game. It's probably impossible to make a game that perfectly simulates reality, because who would even need that? You could just look on Google Maps, or if you're looking for a challenge, a GeoGuessr. If you ask me, the trait that defines video games is the interactive detachment from reality they bring us, just like any other medium, but with that added element of control. You don't really see people begging for animated movies to be more realistic, because that's not why we find animation impressive. There's no linear goal to make animation as realistic as live-action film, because you can just make a live-action film. People don't look at a prestigious piece of art in a gallery and go, "This isn't realistic enough, I'm taken out of it." Why does that mindset apply to games? The immersion and realism of video games is an enormous topic that sort of borders on philosophical questions about why we engage with art and entertainment to begin with. So instead I'm gonna shut up and tell you that I really like it when you get to hang out in a totally made up virtual environment. You might expect me to say something like graphics don't matter, I only like gameplay, but I heavily disagree. The medium of video games includes the video part just as much as the game part. It's not like it's bad when a game is realistic, I just think that it's just dismissive to pretend like all games have to be realistic to be immersive. I don't care if Grand Theft Auto 3 aged badly to you, its artists absolutely nailed the city environment, enough for me to go on about it 20 years later. As a kid, I was totally enamored by any game environments. Playing something like Mario Kart Wii, I'd crash a lot and all momentum would be lost, and I'd get a moment to see Coconut Mall at a slower pace. I'm the kind of freak who wants to hang out there. That kind of ambition stuck with me the more I played games. The first time I saw The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, its focus on small environments and its characters revolutionized my idea of how personal this medium can be. I instantly loved it because I could hang out in Clocktown and get to know its inhabitants, becoming one of my favorite games of all time for how it understood the individuality of its characters in a story so surreal and perilous. I didn't know that when I was 10 years old, but looking back, it is definitely the reason why I liked the game so much. Most of the earlier game memories I have are of LittleBigPlanet, a game I'll spare no time gushing over that features platforming at a relatively slow pace. No time limit, numerous puzzle obstacles, that sort of thing. User-made levels would also embrace the slower pace, and you would get tons of hangout and RPG levels that drop you and your friends into handcrafted environments with varying degrees of jank. It got me to appreciate the patience and effort of personally designing an entire virtual environment, without the limits of it needing to be for any narrative or gameplay purpose. And a lot of them maybe weren't even that good. But it was really special because I could hang out in someone else's artwork. That slow-paced hangouting also struck me in Grand Theft Auto, the first open world series I really played as a kid. Open world games are huge, quite literally, but when my experience with games was super limited, I found the PSP side game Liberty City Stories to be groundbreaking for reasons other than the ridiculous violence. I could control a guy in a city that wasn't real. I sucked at the missions, so I would just go around in this city and walk, seeing the same pedestrians spawn like 8 times or collect this random item that slows the game down for reasons I could never figure out. Of course I steal cars as well, but smaller things like seeing shop signs or trying to figure out what was behind random windows or being able to take the train really left an impact on me. I could tell the world wasn't very realistic, but I could still see it and take it in as if it were. I feel the same about the other GTA games too, but out of them all I have the strongest attachment to this particular map. It blew my mind to find out there are other islands, but I can't bother reaching them because the spin-off sort of really sucks actually. My relationship with the GTA games is sort of weird because on one hand the world building and atmosphere is genuinely top tier even in these earlier entries, but then you play the story missions and they're a huge stink of a mess, whether it's due to gameplay or writing. It varies from game to game and some of them are better than the others. But my intro to the series was this PSP game, and looking back on it, it's got some of the worst dialogue in any game I've ever played, maybe.
Acting like a bitch. He kinda reminds me of you.
What are you trying to say?
Jesus, Tony, you drive like a bitch! He's currently running a Sindako-controlled titty bar. I mean, gentleman's club.
Fuck him, he made his choice.
Hey, JD, you little sicko, get the fuck out of here before I come in here and break your legs.
Oh, I'm coming! Oh, but not like that!
Oh, you're sticky. What the fuck are you wearing?
It's so boneheaded and 2000s-y. I love the world. I love to see weird little details you usually speed past. I love just taking it easy and acting like I live there, and I absolutely hate the story it has to tell. Luckily, the map is exactly the same as GTA 3, and I can play that game because at least it knows its story isn't a huge deal. I can maybe recommend Liberty City Stories if you only have a PSP somehow. It's a marvelous technical achievement for its time and still fun if you ignore the story, which is ironic because it's called Stories. For the things I value about GTA, the small moments where you just check things out like you live there, wondering what's inside all these hollow buildings, I think Yakuza is probably for me. In fact, I know that it is for me. I've played it for a few hours on stream and I really enjoyed my time with it. I haven't really played it since, because if I ever play the Yakuza series it would probably be for an enormous video project, and also I can't maintain a stream schedule frequent enough to allow for a 30-hour action adventure like this. I do acknowledge how good Yakuza's environments are, but if you want something going more in depth about the series' environmental vibes, I'd really recommend this Slow High Heels video. I really want to stress that liminal spaces may be the secret sauce to what I'm exploring in this video. Never the central focus like some itch.io backrooms game, but just part of the overall experience bridging the gap between gameplay moments. On a broad scale, it's what open world games and RPGs do all the time, but I have an enormous soft spot for when these spaces are based on contemporary and familiar settings. I think I'm gonna cause someone viewing this to faint by uttering its name, but Persona 5 is pretty good at this. It borders on being a life sim, with the calendar management and social aspects introduced in the series' third entry solidifying Persona's overall identity. These elements are cool and unique as hell, of course, incorporating a dating sim-esque social system within a dungeon crawler RPG, but I'm not even going over that here. The game allows you to travel all over Tokyo for different functional and narrative reasons, and you can just select your destination from the map to save time, or you can go there yourself, taking in all the exotic atmosphere of a modern city with a functional transit system. That you can navigate and find your way around the city on your own is what makes the game feel prestigious and huge, allowing you to simulate the feeling of getting lost in the train station or discovering cool shops for the first time. You can rent DVDs in it. And that's all anyone would need to tell me to sell me on any game. It's a certified slice of life experience. Now, it's probably important to distinguish what I consider a slice of life game. You might hear me say that and think that any life sim game counts because, well, duh, it has life in the name. But typically life sims are endless and customizable, while I'd say a slice of life game is closer to an RPG or an adventure game with extra special focus on mundane activities. A slower pace that allows you to take in a game environment and its characters without any intense action. When you watch a movie or a TV show categorized as slice of life, it's gonna be about some fictional character's life. We get to see the lives of fictional characters, the worlds they live in, the way they interact with others, all outside of our own control. They're low stakes and often slower paced than many other narratives, so you get to bask in all these smaller details that enhance our understanding of a character's lifestyle. With games, this becomes a whole mess, because we're in control of that character, and how the game is designed is what dictates how much of their life we see. Sometimes these are enormous open-world sandboxes, and sometimes they're more rigid narrative adventure games. Sometimes all we need to be immersed in a fictional character's life is to be able to progress text boxes at our own speed. I'd say Animal Crossing comes as a sort of in-between, where it's an endless sandbox game set in a small town with, at least in earlier titles, heavy restrictions on what you could even do. A lot of that game is just talking to people and making friends. I don't like New Horizons so much. I'm not a fan of how much control you get, but for some that's precisely why they have 3,000 hours in the game. I think New Leaf really hit a good balance between social simulation and customization. That game rips. But I wouldn't really call Animal Crossing a slice of life game though, as even though it's probably the ideal life simulation series, there's no narrative to follow. You're hanging out, but nothing really happens. At least, in my opinion, a slice of life game needs to have a storyline to distinguish it from the simulation genre, which is where things get tricky and I stop feeling like I know what I'm talking about. Whatever, Shenmue is the best one.
Ah, good.
With the Dreamcast, Sega was betting it all on fresh and revolutionary experiences the competitors just didn't have. Releases like Sonic Adventure and Jet Set Radio, and especially Seaman, were hugely experimental, probably to get as much attention as possible so that the console wouldn't fail. The hugest release on it was Shenmue, one of the most expensive games ever produced at the time. Contemporary games like Final Fantasy VII and Ocarina of Time are widely remembered for being enormous achievements in the industry, and Shenmue's just a quirky cult classic now, I guess. I wouldn't ever devalue this game for that though. I fucking love Shenmue, man. Yu Suzuki, Shenmue's director, hadn't actually made any narrative games up to this point. He made arcade games for Sega, notably Outrun and Virtua Fighter, but I guess the guy was sick of that and really wanted to make an RPG. Sega was staking it all on a cinematic RPG headed by someone who had no experience with game narratives. He made fighting and driving games. It was his debut working on any kind of adventure game. They had some real guts, let me fucking tell you. Leading up to its release, Shenmue was advertised as a free game, an acronym standing for Full Reactive Eyes Entertainment, which is a long way of saying video game. They really wanted the game to seem different and wild and new, so they invented a genre, but if I had to categorize Shenmue as a new genre, I'd call it a slice of life game. The values of this game's core design ooze with the passion of a small town lifestyle, with a story so personal, environments that bleed modesty, and characters that talk funny.
Oh, hello, yo.
If you played the Japanese version of this game, or enabled Japanese audio in its HD remaster, then you do not know the true essence of Shenmue.
Goro.
What's groovin', bro?
During development, Suzuki insisted that all voice work had to be recorded in Japan. This meant the majority of Shenmue's voice actors were Japanese, even in the English dub, with a few exceptions brought in from America, such as Corey Marshall, who voices Ryo. However well each voice actor could fluently speak English maybe didn't matter nearly as much as the direction and management behind their performances, which was evidently pretty troubled.
There was poor management and too much money thrown at it.
It was rushed, and I know enough about games to know you're unlikely to get a consistent product. The reason we did it in Japan, by the way, was because Mr. Suzuki wanted access to it while it was being done. He probably thought that if he could go and quality control it himself it would be better. It was done around his schedule. It wasn't done because it was the best thing to have done. It wasn't done because we didn't have the money to do it in New York. It was simply done because that was his decision.
So, this resulted in the game's English audio being coated in a thick layer of unusual voice acting.
Tom,
Hi!
you're looking good.
I'm always chillin'.
It'd be easy to dunk on it and just call it bad, but let's be real, these voice actors were definitely doing their best with what they were given, and I'd honestly argue their imperfection enhances the humanity of the game by a ton. I brought up the subject of video game immersion earlier, but often when people describe immersion, they're describing a hypothetical perfect game where every detail, every minute of gameplay, every model, every texture, every line of voice acting, every asset is perfectly in sync to deliver the most realistic experience. If something's noticeably wrong, it gets criticized, but why is that the case? My point is that if every facet of Shenmue's production was successful and squeaky clean, I wouldn't feel the same playing it. I absolutely adore the awkward moments it has, and I would absolutely say it enhances the world of the game by making a lot of its characters sound awkward and unusual.
When you go to Canada, do you always fly?
Yeah, usually. Why'd you want to know?
I'm looking for a cheap way to travel overseas.
You're going overseas?
Yeah.
It makes this game world feel even more realistic by having some unconventional freaks with clunky voices dotted around.
What's growing, bro?
I'd argue the demand that every asset of a game should be perfect prevents more diverse and interesting expression. With Shenmue, it's accidental, but it gives it this offbeat charm you don't really see in too many games made with this high of a budget. And often, weird imperfections like this are why I'll be interested in a game. The same sentiment can certainly be applied to movies as well. Games get compared to movies so much that it's a little confusing to me. Of course, loads of games are inspired by movies or even directly based on them.
You pop this piece of crap in, expecting Ghostbusters, and what do you get? Well, Ghostbusters.
Games can allow a player to control a character like they're in a movie, and that often naturally feels cool to them. But if you say games should be like movies, I want you to stop watching the video and go play Kingdom Hearts, a game based so strongly on movies that also feels nothing like one. Games are so inherently distinct from movies that whenever one gets adapted into a movie, it's usually a critical failure for trying to cram an interactive experience into a linear narrative. Did you ever watch this year's Tetris movie? It's nothing like the game. I got ripped off by Apple TV. But I just find it weird, because anyone's idea of a game being like a movie is like a crime thriller or an action movie or something. It's way less common to look at a comedy movie and go, yeah, I want to play that. But this is usually because the genre of game is never considered. If an action movie was made into a game, then of course it would be an action game that follows the narrative of the movie. But genres more focused on narrative ironically rarely get the movie to game spotlight. There are tons of licensed games that are just platformers or puzzle games that don't really take into account the context of what they're adapting. And so you get what's often referred to as shovelware because of how tone deaf they tend to be. Anyway, I want a video game that brings its audience the same feeling as a Neil Breen movie, and I'm not kidding.
I have not been writing another novel. I've been hacking into government and corporate international secrets all over the world. And I'm going to expose them all. And no one knows I'm doing it. No one knows.
What?
Shenmue comes really close by virtue of its disastrous localization process, but if only there was a game so consistently imperfect that it feels like it's deliberately messing with us.
Sure, that's one way of looking at it, but it's totally wrong.
Sometimes there are games made in such a way that it's incomprehensible to believe why they even exist. One game that deliberately messes with its audience is The Ultimate Challenge from Beat Takeshi, designed by a celebrity who hates video games and made it as masochistic and cryptic as possible. It does, however, feature a contemporary setting unusual for the Famicom, and if you ignore all the cynical violence and domestic abuse, it sort of becomes a proto-Shenmue with how it just lets you waltz into a karaoke bar and drink alcohol. It's a game you can hang out in, but also a game that hates your guts. Deadly Premonition feels like it was similarly designed by an outsider trying to mess with us, though mainly with its cutscenes and dialogue.
Honestly though, it's been a while since anyone has stayed here.
I couldn't help but notice. Aside from you and me, there seems to be no other guests or workers around.
What's that?
The protagonist is the special agent Francis York Morgan, who talks as if it's at the player, but in actuality it's his alter ego or something. He'll have these long info dump monologues at you about, like, Back to the Future or something, during these unconventional long and cozy drives from place to place in this rural oregano Twin Peaks-ass town.
Jaws also appears in another movie that was produced by Spielberg, the second Back to the Future. It was directed by Robert Zemeckis, who later made Forrest Gump. That's also a masterpiece, of course, but we'll discuss that another time.
Whenever he interacts with other characters, it's like watching a cast of aliens try to make a crime drama. But York especially just has this unearthly quality to him. He sticks out and acts weird, but no one bats an eye. Just like Shenmue, you can also hang out here, but it contrasts with the Resident Evil 4 kind of horror gameplay moments, and so there's a natural sense of unease throughout this whole town. While Takeshi's challenge is unconventionally hostile as a result of its designer's hatred for games, Deadly Premonition is atmospherically hostile as a result of it trying to be a horror game. It just doesn't feel very much like a horror game to me. The moments where you chill out and drive and buy coffee overshadow the Leon Kennedy horror game zombie action. I don't consider myself a horror fan even slightly, but a lot of the time if I check out a horror game it's because it's got immense atmosphere that ironically ends up feeling cozy. This is usually psychological horror, where instead of there being a huge goofy threat chasing you, you're going around a town or something where the protagonist's own fears creep up on you around any corner. This ties into my whole slice of life investigation because, as we saw with Deadly Premonition, horror games like this tend to have downtime or build-up that eventually pay off. Or the entire game is just downtime, which is the case for Yume Nikki, a dream simulator with no linear storyline about navigating the dreams of an introvert who never goes outside. There are no real big aieee moments. The game just leaves you to speculate and ponder, which means it is, in essence, a game in which you hang out. Just a really abstract one. I can, of course, draw comparisons to LSD, the cult hit PS1 game named after the funny drug, so everyone who made it must have been on drug because that's how game development work. And I like that game a lot, but it reaches outside of the realm of what I'm discussing, since there's no protagonist and hence no life to be sliced. If we're bridging the gap between LSD and something like Deadly Premonition, then I really adore this other PS1 game, Germs Nerawareta Machi, which lets you hang out so much I didn't even know it was a horror game at first. It's like if you got the New Yorkness of GTA 3, the perspective and graphics of LSD, the hangout ability of Shenmue, and the horror of Deadly Premonition, and stirred them into one ultra game. You can take the subway. It even has a fake Denny's. To wrap around back to Yume Nikki, that's an RPG Maker game, using the template of an RPG for its environment navigation. This sort of brings to mind that when I describe a slice of life game, it tends to be an RPG without any of the combat. The term RPG nonsensically describes a very specific type of game, when really most games have you playing a role in them. The actual distinction is that RPGs have a lot of numbers, I guess. I could seriously go on for hours about the different kinds of RPGs, the formats they take, and the amount of combat in them. Heck, I already talked about Persona, so to keep things simple, I'll just bring up how much I love Yokai Watch for its contemporary setting, and the fact that it lets you catch bugs and go fishing. This should be what a lot more RPGs strive to be, where you're just living in this world and going around and checking things out, and every convenience store has a save point. I really wish Pokemon had this much atmosphere. Pokemon does have a similar thing going on, it's just astronomically different and way more Dragon Quest than Boku no Natsuyasumi. Yeah, that's another really good one too. If you already know about Boku no Natsuyasumi, you might have been yelling at the screen this entire time waiting for me to bring it up. It's the quintessential slice of life game. There's no denying it. This game rules. It is also incredibly Japanese. There's certainly a conversation to be had about the different values of different game designers from different regions across the world, and it's not something I'm really prepared to dive headfirst into. I generally say that a lot of games that focus on that element of being able to relax in a virtual space are from Japan, and often exclusively released there. It's the kind of place where Densha de Go becomes an arcade smash in part because of its accuracy to how the Yamanote line looks, the sort of environment for developers to come up with a concept like Animal Crossing, which most certainly would remain an obscure gem if it wasn't made and localized by Nintendo. I do think it's a case of how good the localization for a given game is, or if it's even been translated to begin with, which I imagine is why so many people find LSD to be weird and alien and unusual, why loads of people did not play Yokai Watch when it released internationally, why Shenmue is a cult classic rather than a game that was successful at the time that it was released.
What's going, bro?
The lack of quality or accessibility will obviously lead to games getting buried underground, where they get found by freaks like me who just really want to play an entire game that feels like those hangout levels in LittleBigPlanet. I really have no idea why it's such a huge concept in Japan. It's so popular that a third of the Wikipedia article for the term slice of life is about anime and manga. I believe that the reason to center a game around hanging out in its world would be more popular internationally if it weren't for the popular clashing idea that games need to have meaningful gameplay and compulsory action. In Grand Theft Auto, you can hang out, but the game puts a gun in your hand and tells you it's okay to run people over. In a more just world, there would be a mod for GTA San Andreas that literally disables the ability to shoot people and steal cars that don't belong to you, even just to see how silly it would be. Listen, I don't know. I just really want to play something like Shenmue or Boku no Natsuyasumi, but instead of idyllic rural Japan, it's in the middle of some buttfuck nowhere American town. Deadly Premonition comes so close. I only wish more widespread releases had the intent to present a real-world place to its player, even in a stylized or inaccurate way. Give me Professor Layton London Life. I want more London Life. They didn't even include that in the European release of this game. It's by the Mother 3 devs, man. I changed my mind. I don't like the London Life very much. In October 2023, I watched True Stories for the first time, this movie by Talking Heads directed by its frontman David Byrne, and I quickly fell in love and gushed about it in a long article on my NeoCity site. It has a lot going on, and I recommend watching it if you don't know what I'm going on about, but it's this unusual celebration of modern culture that shows a bunch of people living in the middle of Texas. It's this heartfelt story about an entire town, how it lives all at once, how people act when others aren't looking, and the culture they partake in as a result of American modernism. It's weaved together by a soundtrack album from the band, and cinematography that at times really screams first-person adventure. Byrne uses himself as a narrator, set up as a guy just making his way into town that gets to see it all in action. He just goes from place to place and everyone sort of already knows him. This is really my favorite aspect of the movie for its, whether intentional or not, expression of neurodivergence. Being disconnected yet integrated into this world and viewing it with a sort of external perspective, which is absolutely incredible and is why I immediately fell in love with it.
Anyway, this is the Varicorp building just outside Virgil. It's cool. It's a multi-purpose shape. A box. We have no idea what's inside there.
Dude, this is a video game scenario. This sort of setup of a guy just making his way into town for one reason or another and interacting with everyone there is exactly what slice of life games do. Deadly Premonition, Animal Crossing, Majora's Mask, even games like Shenmue where the protagonist already lives there and knows everyone have to introduce everything to the player. The external entity that observes the day-to-day life of the town's inhabitants. It's possibly why I'm so attached to these types of games, because to me it's reflective of the way I experience things as someone who isn't neurotypical. I may be in control of myself, but the things I see around me are unpredictable and often confusing or cryptic. I don't even know how differently I view the world. It's wild out here. But more importantly, these games remind me that everything I see has a story behind it, and the games that emphasize that uniqueness are some of the greatest. If you return to Majora's Mask, the game that introduced me to the concept of a game's NPCs having more substantial autonomy, it's difficult to ignore the predecessing title, Link's Awakening, and its own influences. The TV drama Twin Peaks, a series that often gets described as not making sense and being weird and being wacky.
Link's Awakening, which Tezuka-san did whatever he wanted with, had quite an influence over subsequent Zelda games.
I wonder about that.
As far as the general flow goes, I think so.
I didn't try to do that on purpose, though. Oh right, about Twin Peaks? Whoa, here we go. Ha, Iwata-san, do you know about Twin Peaks?
No. Bring me up to speed. Ha.
We were talking about this before you arrived. I was talking about fashioning Link's Awakening with a feel that was somewhat like Twin Peaks. At the time, Twin Peaks was rather popular. The drama was all about a small number of characters in a small town.
Okay.
So when it came to Link's Awakening, I wanted to make something that, while it would be small enough in scope to easily understand, it would have deep and distinctive characteristics.
As of writing, I haven't actually watched the series past its first few episodes, but I sort of get the vibe it exudes.
I think I saw a cottontail rabbit.
It must have been a snowshoe rabbit.
Snowshoe?
Right.
Snowshoe. Snowshoe rabbit.
The influence of Twin Peaks on these types of games isn't difficult to see. Deadly Premonition obviously takes notes from the series, but there's also the general identity of David Lynch's film work that resonates in many of the games I love. The quote, "I don't know why people expect art to make sense, life doesn't make sense," should also apply to game design, where it's the easy default to make a world that makes sense, but it's a lot more fun and in some ways more realistic to make a world in which nothing makes sense. Link's Awakening is a game about a hero living in the dream of a giant fish. It's got Mario in it. Hey, have you ever heard of this game called Kingdom Hearts? Perhaps the biggest reason for why I got so attached to True Stories is that it sort of expresses what I've been living. I just moved out of the town I've been living in for the majority of my life into a completely new place so that I could study here. It's a lot, and I saw True Stories in the midst of all the chaos of living here. The sudden clash of needing to familiarize myself with new surroundings and meet all sorts of new people while living independently for the first time feels, and I don't want to sound self-censored, really similar to a slice of life narrative. It's the same sort of feeling Animal Crossing sought to invoke, the same naivety found in Boku no Natsuyasumi, the same sort of uncertainty felt in Deadly Premonition. But above all else, the surreal feeling of alienation expressed in True Stories. I might be reading more out of this film than it may be conveying, but I just relate too much to the symbolism of this narrator and how he examines the culture of this normal town. Normality isn't real, which is why this movie goes out of its way to show that everyone's got their own trait they wish to express to some extent. It's Majora's Mask logic, it's what Shenmue achieves on accident, it's the honesty of self-expression crystallized into an over-exaggerated archetype of a small town. There's no such thing as a normal town, everyone is at least a little freaky, so why do gamers see games that don't conform to their standards of a normal game and jump to the conclusion that they're bad for being that way? We decided that ludonarrative dissonance is inherently negative. If there's one thing living life has showed me, especially as someone who's neurodivergent, it's that the world really does make no sense, and that's totally okay. David Byrne diagnosed himself with autism, and honestly, the symptoms do really show in his work, and especially this movie. True Stories should have gotten a cozy CD-ROM tie-in adventure game, and probably would have if it was released a decade later. I'm telling you, if Byrne knew of the potential of game development, he would have made something meta and atmospheric like Moon Remix RPG Adventure for the PS1. Instead, we just have Moon Remix RPG Adventure for the PS1, which is to Dragon Quest what True Stories is to America. Moon is a victim of a lack of localization that was incredibly niche for the decades it went untranslated. But in 2020, it recovered from this state of obscurity and got a re-release and official translation, bringing literally the exact same game. No bells and whistles, no fancy Wahoo filters, none of that, just literally the game in English on Switch, PS4 and PC. I only wish more games were so fortunate to get a re-release as faithful as this, but I'm glad I can just tell you you can buy and play this one. It's essentially an anti-RPG made by ex-Squaresoft devs who really wanted to goof around and stretch the limits of what an RPG is, in which you collect love by helping people out and reaping the souls of monsters slain by the game's hero. It features NPCs who are characterized as unique individuals, living in the game alongside you, and it's really effective for that reason. I played Moon for the first time a while ago, and I guess it's had a massive impact on what I value in games because it has all of what I've been trying to find in these other games. When I watched True Stories for the first time, I was thinking about how much I loved its representation of the world, and I guess deep down I was thinking of Moon, which goes and achieves the same sentiment of everyone's individuality being so important. I was struck by David Byrne as a narrator floating from place to place, and I was similarly struck by the protagonist of Moon showing up as an invisible ghost who has to wear someone else's clothes to even be seen, both for the same reason. I don't want to feel invisible. Hello, I'm visiting my old house. My family's house for Christmas. It is currently the 22nd of December. I'm in my old room, which is very strange because I haven't been here for a few months, and I've just for the past couple of days I've just been noticing all the differences and all the small details that I maybe forgot about or just didn't appreciate while I was here because I've been away. And that, along with just hearing about like new shops opening and seeing different signage around and everything, different signs and shops and everything, it's just the way that, like, I don't know, just seeing different things that weren't there when I left has been really surreal and just really strange. And it's crazy that I'm working on this video. I've been working on this video. Like, by this point I have it most of the way done. I'm planning to get it out in January, and it's just very strange that I've been working on a video about games in which I like basically say like I really enjoy appreciating all of the small details. Previously, the context was that I'd moved into a new place, and in real life I've been noticing all the small details there. But now that I'm back home again, it's like noticing all the small details in a place that I'm really familiar with. And it sort of puts into perspective that, like, when people design games, they're designing like every asset and every part of the environment that you see, even if they're completely insignificant and they don't matter to the game, they don't matter to the player. If it's the type of thing that, like, in real life you would just like walk by on the street and not really think about, it's still there, and someone is responsible for it being there. And that kind of thing is like blowing my mind right now, because, you know, doing like environment art, like I mean I'm on a course for game design, so I've done quite a bit of environment art and I plan on doing more. And so I just really, I appreciate, like, even if it really just has no consequence on the player, I really love those small things. And I know that I was going on about David Byrne a bunch, but like, while I was working on this video, like in the middle of it, like after I'd already written the script, I read his book, Strange Ritual, which is a bunch of different things going on, but the main thing that I took away from it is that it's just a lot of photos of different things that, whether or not it's generally considered art, whether or not it's like conventional art, it was made by someone and it's been put there by someone, and it ranges from like, you know, like gallery art or like framed photos or like Polaroids to just like shopping aisles and like road signs. And there's one line that says like, "I worship meaningless images," and I feel like that's sort of what this video is mostly about in a way, because a lot of the things that I notice in video games are meaningless and they don't really matter to the actual core game design, but they're still there. And they were put there not even just by like a person, but by someone who was intentionally designing this world and put it there. So you're witnessing the thing that the environment designer put there rather than just a random person. So it's part of the narrative, and I really wish that I had more time to sort of go into this in the main video, in the main chunk of the video. But right now I'm just like thinking about it in retrospect, and it's like, man, like, especially now I'm just appreciating these details and these things. I didn't want to do like an overly long ending bit here like I did in the past couple of videos, because they're really long and really awkward, but I really wanted to sort of express this about it, just as sort of like a sudden like I didn't consider it before, but now I've sort of like, things have been put into perspective, and it's just like, oh, like, whoa. But if you liked this video, then I'm really glad that you liked it. Thanks for watching either way. I really appreciate it, and I'm glad that I can still make YouTube videos, even though I've been very busy in the real life, in reality, outside of YouTube and such. I still really appreciate that I can make stuff like this, even as sort of like an extension of my life or the things that I'm studying in uni. It's just very nice, and I'm glad that I got to do it, even if it took me like 5 months to make a half-hour video, which I guess is more like 40 minutes now. But yeah, thank you for watching, and I guess the philosophy of like what I went over in this video, even though it was kind of a mess, but the sort of like the energy that I expressed here will sort of like go forward into my future videos, I think. Even just a little bit. Like it's just sort of like, this video is just all about like expressing the things that I value in games, and it's gonna sort of like, I want it to be clear like that I value stuff like that when talking about games in the future, and even in my previous couple of videos about Kingdom Hearts and Size, I just, it really means a lot to me, I think. I don't know, whatever. Blah.